Hello everyone. So today we start out with talking about the phenomenological methods. My spelling here, there's an E here. Right. Before we talk about the phenomenological methods in relation to particularly qualitative research methods and more broadly psychology, let's just look at some history. Where does phenomenology come from? So basically, when we look at philosophy, right? Philosophy has this sub branch of study which is called epistemology. So when philosophers are looking at the world and trying to make sense of it, one of the questions that they address is how do we know what we know, right? Or basically the knowledge that we have, how do we get to it, right? So this is basically a sub branch of philosophy, right? And phenomenology is essentially, you can say that it is an epistemology because it has one particular way of looking at knowledge and how we can access knowledge, right? What is that basic assumption? Because that basic assumption is what sort of links the phenomenology of philosophy to the phenomenology that we use in qualitative methods within psychology. Because we study this, that even though psychology started out as the sub branch of philosophy, or it started out when philosophy and physiology came together, but now if we look at things, philosophy and psychology on the surface do not have much to do with each other. So when we look at phenomenology within qualitative research methods in psychology, and we look at phenomenology within philosophy, so what is the relationship between this? The relationship between this is given by some of the assumptions that underlie phenomenology. One of those is that there's this particular concept within phenomenology which is known as intentionality. Now, what exactly does intentionality mean? Intentionality basically means the assumption that the assumption of intentionality is that the world and the self, let me just write this out, the world and the self are inseparable components of meaning. What exactly does this mean? इसका मतलब ये है बेसिकली, इफ़ यू आर टू ब्रेक इट डाउन, अभी तक मैंने जो कहा है हम इसको ज़्यादा कंफ्यूजिंग नहीं बनाते. अभी तक मैंने ये कहा है कि phenomenological methods, they live within qualitative research methods in psychology, but then phenomenology is also a branch of philosophy, in that when we talk about epistemology, epistemology is a branch of philosophy that talks about how do we know what we know. जो phenomenology है वो एक तरह की epistemology है जो ये कहती है, जिसकी basic assumption ये है कि the world and the self are inseparable components of meaning. Now what does this mean? This basically means कि हम जो कुछ दुनिया में बाहर है और हम जो हैं, ठीक है, उसका जो ताल्लुक है उसको आप अलग नहीं कर सकते, ठीक है. There is no such thing as an object in itself and our perception of it. These two things are not separate. Our perception of anything is tied into the object, right? हमारी जो position होगी towards an object, that will determine how we see it, right? हमारी जो भी thoughts and feelings होंगी about the object, that will determine what that object really means to us or how it appears to us. तो आप जो है perception को सेल्फ को, क्योंकि परसेप्शन जो है वो सेल्फ से आती है, उसको और आप ऑब्जेक्ट को जो दुनिया में एग्जिस्ट करता है उसको आप सेपरेट नहीं कर सकते. जो भी सेपरेशन होगी वो आर्टिफिशियल होगी. So basically the basic premise behind phenomenology is that the world and self are inseparable components. You cannot separate the self from the world. ठीक है, जो भी आप perceive करते हैं वो that is built into the world, and then you use this sort of lens to see whatever is out in the world. Basically, even this language that I'm using, out in the world, will not be acceptable to someone who's using the phenomenological methods, because they would argue that there is nothing out in the world. That is what we mean when we say that the world and self are inseparable components of meaning, right? तो ये बेसिक प्रेमिस है जो यहाँ पे जो फिलॉसफी है आपकी जो फिनोमेनोलॉजी फिलॉसफी के अंदर है और जो साइकोलॉजी के अंदर है उसको मतलब एक साथ लेके चलती है. ठीक है, उसके बाद फिर आप ये देखेंगे कि विद इन फिनोमेनोलॉजी और फिनोमेनोलॉजिकल मेथड्स देयर आर डिफरेंट sort of ways of doing it. So one is more descriptive phenomenology, right, and the other is more interpretive phenomenology. अब इन दोनों में क्या फ़र्क है? बिफोर वी गेट टू दैट, हम एक और चीज़ जो है जिस पे गौर मैं करना चाहूँगी वो ये है कि विद इन द फिनोमेनोलॉजिकल मेथड विद इन फ़िलासफ़ी, तो फ़िलासफ़ी के अंदर ही जब हम कंसिडर करते हैं, ठीक है, तो जो फिनोमेनोलॉजिकल मेथड है उसकी एक अप्रोच है. ठीक है, जब जो फ़िलासफ़र जिन्होंने ये प्रपोज़ किया मेथड, उन्होंने कहा कि हमें दुनिया में किसी भी चीज़ को देखने के लिए फिनोमेनोलॉजिकल मेथड उस पर अप्लाई करना चाहिए. ठीक है, व्हाट इज़ दैट मेथड, व्हाट एग्जैक्टली डज दैट मेथड से? इसका जवाब आपके पास यहाँ है. Basically, the phenomenological method involves 3 different stages, for those of you who can't read this because this is smaller. So the first of these is something that we call epoche. अब epoche के अंदर क्या होता है within the phenomenological method is that you bracket off all sorts of previous ideas that you had about the phenomena. ठीक है, जो भी आपके पास पहले से knowledge है, let's say about a phenomena, whatever that you feel towards it, right? Whatever that you think about it, you try to bracket it off, right? दूसरा जो है उसके अंदर है कि you try to engage in something that's called phenomenological reduction. ठीक है, phenomenological reduction क्या है? ये है कि आप जो हैं you try to describe whatever experience that there is in all of its totality. Now what does this mean? This basically means कि आप उसे बहुत डिटेल में डिस्क्राइब करते हैं. If for example there is something like an apple in front of you, so you will say that it's a red color, it's round, it has this particular shape to it, it has a particular feel to it, right? So you try to describe the phenomena in all its totality. Okay? That is what phenomenological reduction is. And then the third phase of this is something that's called imaginative variation. ठीक है, imaginative variation के अंदर आप क्या करते हैं कि आप ये सोचते हैं कि जो भी structure है जो आपने describe किया, how is that made possible? ठीक है, what is the context within which this phenomena exists? ठीक है, that is what you try to say. So for example, if you have the apple there, you try to think of the color of it and how is that color made possible. So basically you try to look at the structure of the phenomena. ठीक है, यहाँ पे तो आप concentrate कर रहे थे phenomenological reduction पे on what it is, right? ठीक है, जब आप imaginative variation की बात करते हैं तो you concentrate on how is this what made possible. ठीक है, so this is a very small summary of what the phenomenological method is. हम जब descriptive phenomenological methods की बात करते हैं, so this is what we talk about, कि जब हम describe कर रहे होते हैं, what we're trying to look at is that we're trying to look at a phenomena in its essence, right? Because this is what phenomenology was about as well in philosophy, that it was looking at different phenomena and trying to use trying to apply this method to them so that you could perceive these phenomena in all of their purity. ठीक है. डिस्क्रिप्टिव फिनोमिनोलॉजी में भी आप कुछ ऐसा कर रहे हैं कि आप you're looking at different phenomena and applying the phenomenological method to them. Then there are various stages that are outlined by different psychologists who have worked with descriptive phenomenology. Let me just show you what they are. So these are basically, the first is that you obtain a concrete description of the phenomena of interest. You adopt the phenomenological attitude towards the phenomena, right? So this is what the phenomenological attitude is. These three different stages. You read the entire description to gain an impression of the whole. Then what you do is that, so you read the entire description to gain an impression of the whole. You reread the description and identify meaning units. And then you identify and make explicit the psychological significance of each meaning unit. And then you, the final stage is you articulate the general structure of the experience of the phenomena. Now, when we look at this, you might start thinking, and this is something that you ought to be thinking, is what sort of questions can you sort of answer? What sort of research questions do you, need to form if you were to follow the phenomenological method or the phenomenological approach? So basically, the phenomenological approach, right, if you're using the descriptive one or the interpretive one, right, what it's interested in is looking at experiences from the standpoint of the individual, right, keeping the first assumption that we talked about in mind, that, you cannot separate the self from the world, right? So basically, research questions that follow or that call forth for phenomenological methods look something, or are basically looking to explore people's experiences, right? Now those experiences, or they can be exploring people's feelings, right, or people's meaning making, right, about particular phenomena, right? So for example, and they can be also actually, this doesn't need to be or, this can be and, so they can be exploring all of these. So for example, a research question that would use phenomenological methods can look something like this, right? For example, what does it mean for students to live through the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Or you can have, what does it mean for what does it mean to be an acid attack survivor? Right? So when you're asking these sort of questions, you're not just looking at these people's experiences or their feelings. That's one of the things that you're looking at, but you're also looking at how do they make meaning of being in these particular positions. How do you make meaning of being a student who's living through a COVID-19 pandemic? How do you make meaning of being an acid attack survivor, right? So you're basically looking at the world through these people's perspective, and this is really where IPA comes in. So we've been talking about descriptive phenomenology and phenomenological methods as a whole, but when we talk about phenomenological methods, we mostly talk about this one particular method, which is called interpretive phenomenological analysis. So a psychologist by the name of Jonathan Smith came forth with this method, right? And basically, Jonathan Smith understood, so he broke off with previous phenomenological traditions. We talked about how when we're also doing, sort of descriptive phenomenology, right? So we're trying to apply the phenomenological method or the phenomenological attitude towards whatever phenomena that we're studying, because we want to truly understand what this phenomena is about, right? Jonathan Smith, on the other hand, sort of understood that, a researcher, when they are looking at someone else's experiences, right? Accounts of someone else's experiences, because how do you get data for, this sort of research? You're looking at interview transcripts, you might be looking at, when you're doing IPA, most of the times you're looking at semi-structured interviews, because that is the research method that gives you, the most rich kind of data that you need for IPA. But you're essentially looking at accounts of these people's experiences, and Jonathan Smith understood that a researcher can only interpret these experiences, right? Because any sort of analysis is essentially an interpretation, right? Even when you're, for example, using all sorts of activity according to this school of thought is essentially an interpretation. For example, even if you have thoughts, right, and you're putting those thoughts in language, right, that can be said. So there are schools of thought that will disagree with this, but you can say that it is kind of an interpretation because you're putting it in language, right? So the very act of putting anything in language can be an interpretation. But what Jonathan Smith was emphasizing on was that, the researcher basically is trying to make sense of these experiences, is trying to interpret these experiences, right? So it's basically that they're, making sense, the researcher is making sense of someone else making sense of their experience, right? And this is something that you accept when you're doing interpretive and phenomenological analysis, that this is basically, a circle, in the sense that you're making sense of someone else making sense of their experience, right? So it's basically, a double task in that manner, right? Because the sort of questions that we look at in interpretive phenomenological analysis, right? So we talk about how these are about meaning making, right? And you're essentially meaning making of, making meaning of someone making meaning of their experiences, right? So basically that is one of the things and that is why, the word interpretive is here in the first place, right? Because you're interpreting someone else's experiences, right? And we've talked about how, and you're basically, what you're trying to do is that you're trying to step into someone else's shoes and trying to understand their worldview. But that obviously, it can never be that you can suspend your own judgments. That is something that will never be possible, right? Because obviously you approach any phenomena with a particular standpoint, and that is why it's very important to address your reflexivity in any form of qualitative research, right? You are trying obviously to be as objective, if there is such a thing, in the sense that you're not, obviously the sort of questions that you're asking, they're not value laden, they're not sort of loaded questions, and they're not leading questions. But at the same time, and the sort of questions that you're asking when you're doing a semi-structured interview are obviously supposed to be open-ended, and they're supposed to be questions that are structured such that they elicit the most rich kind of data. But when you're doing your analysis, but whenever even when you're asking a question, the sort of questions you frame, the sort of topic that you choose, right, there is something of you in that, and you cannot take that away completely, right? So that is what the method sort of has that built into it when it's talking about how it's the researcher making sense of someone else making sense of their experience, right? How do you do interpretive phenomenological analysis? So firstly, let's just talk about the data collection methods. We've talked about how usually it's semi-structured interviews that you're using. However, in qualitative research, it's mostly prescriptions. So people have used journal entries and other sources of data obviously as well. So yes, so there's semi-structured interviews, and there can be journal entries, anything that gives you a rich amount of data, right? And then and basically when we're talking about data collection, the sort of sample that we usually use for IPA is small, right? And the reason for that is because you're trying to get a lot of detail from this small sample, right? So your data will be rich, and it will be thick, even though the sample will be small. And when you're keeping the sample small, you want it to be extremely homogeneous, right? Why is that? Because when you're doing IPA, you're trying to understand different themes. You're trying to understand, we talked about these different research questions. So for example, you're trying to understand what does it mean to be an acid attack survivor. So you don't want to, get a female who's 23 years and interview her, and then interview another man who's 40 years, right? And you do not want there to be too much disparity in terms of socioeconomics as well, because that, with that sort of thing, you might not be able to get a lot of meaningful themes. So you need the data to be more homogeneous, right? Having said that, let's move on to the different steps that are involved in doing an interpretive phenomenological analysis. When we do that, after that we'll look at an example. So some of the steps that are involved in doing an interpretive phenomenological analysis are, so similarly as it was in thematic analysis, so the stages. So the first is, so when you're doing IPA, you're essentially working with, when we talk about semi-structured interviews, you're working with transcripts, right? So you're always working with written material. So the first stage is that, you make yourself familiar, right? So you read and reread, right? And as you're doing this reading and rereading, one of the things that you do is that you take notes, right, in one of the margins that you have. Now these different, these notes can be divided into 3 different categories, right? So, one can be descriptive notes, in which you're basically describing what's going on in, the paragraph that you're looking at or the sentence that you're looking at. Then you can have more linguistic comments on the text, in which you can comment on what sort of language is being used to say whatever is being said. And then the third can be more, conceptual sort of comments, which talk about the context of whatever is happening, and what context is this being said in, right? So there are all these different kinds of notes that you can produce after you've read and reread the data and made yourself familiar with it. Right. The second stage of it is that you try to identify some emergent themes, right? So basically, you try to, we've talked about this in the earlier video as well, that you try to look at, the different patterns of meaning that you might see emerging from the data, right? And then once you've done that, the third stage basically requires that you introduce some sort of structure to your themes. So for example, if you have, let's say, different themes, like you're looking at the transcript of someone who's talking about, when they were little. So, they're talking about, the experiences at school, and that's one theme that you come up with. Then, they're talking about relationship with parents. That's another theme that you come up with. And they're talking about, let's say, friends from childhood, right? So, these are, if let's say these are 3 themes that you came up with, right? You can categorize them under the broader cluster of childhood, right? Or if you can, what's really encouraged within interpretive phenomenological analysis is that you use the words of the participants to label themes, right? So one of the things that you can do is that, you can say, you can label this theme cluster as when I was little. So basically what you try to do is that you try to form clusters of different themes and you structure them in this manner, right? This is what is the most important bit of it, right? Now let's look at an example.